Hi everyone, we're going to continue with unraveling the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. Today's video is going to be in several parts. This is going to be part one. It's called The Hidden Agenda Behind the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict. And I'm going to start reading now because there's an awful lot of information. If you saw the last video that I posted where I explained the Palestine Mandate that was issued by Britain in 1917 to 1922, at the end of me explaining all the different articles in that mandate, there were 28 of them. At the end, I put a video by Spielberg done in 1910. I went back another decade or so before that mandate to show you what was like in Israel, and I showed you footage of the kibbutz. Now the kibbutz is an experiment by the Israeli people, and there is a mission behind that, and we're going to unfold it as I read. So I want you to pay attention because this is very, very important, okay? A traditional kibbutz is very intimate and completely communal settlement in Israel. Members of the kibbutz are called kibbutniks, and they live on common ground, and they share all of their belongings and their income. Until the 21st century, kibbutniks on traditional kibbutzim would even share responsibility for their children, having them learn and sleep in separate children's homes. The idea of kibbutz was founded on socialist and communist ideology in a radical attempt to establish a better human being by having an impact on Israeli society through its values of consistent mutual support, inclusivity, equality, and fairness. So this is Israel's idea of how a human being should be. Israel has taken responsibility for reconstructing the human being, to make the human being a better human being, and how becoming a better human being can have an impact on the Israeli society in general. Through Israeli values of having consistent mutual support, to consistently support Israel, and inclusively equality and fairness to them. The kibbutzniks set forth for Israel coming from every direction in the name of Zionism, or the return of Jewish people to the land of ancient Israel. Kibbutzim were the first movement-driven instances of relocation that literally planted the roots of modern Israel. I'm going to read that again. Kibbutzim was the first movement-driven instances of relocation that literally planted the roots of modern Israel. Remember, I showed you in that Spielberg video that those were Jews that came from Poland and Germany, and they were refugees, and they were supplanted in that part of Palestine to enrich the land, the dry land, and cultivate the land through the guidance of Israel itself. Zionism has the information on how to develop the land and how to make it flourish. So to give them their needs met, they worked. They rotated all the duties, and they lived on the compound, and they made the land flourish. Until 1948, When the official state of Israel was established, there was a fierce sense of Jewish responsibility throughout the world to assist in the development of the future nation. Now, where did all that come from? Where did all that drive around the world come from to devote global power to making this dream come true for Israel? It says until 1948, when the official state of Israel was established, there was a fierce sense of Jewish responsibility throughout the whole world to assist in the development of the future nation. That's a lot of input. Jews have been negatively targeted by societies since the 5th century BC, frequently experiencing traumatic belittlement, expulsion, and even death. Zionism seemed the only viable option for Jews after centuries of rejection and persecution from nations all over the world and the rise of violently anti-Semitic fascism in Europe during the 20th century. As they immigrated from countries worldwide, Jews began to rapidly populate the land of Palestine between the years of 1910 and 1950. Now that video I showed you of the kibbutz was done by Spielberg in 1910. This is why at the end of that video yesterday on the Palestine Mandate, which was 1917, I went back to 1910 to show you what it looked like, what was going on a decade earlier. And we saw the kibbutz. Okay? However, kibbutzim grew more obsolete as urban cities began growing and encroaching on smaller settlements. And the influences of the greater Jewish and the later Israeli society began absorbing the attention that once was kibbutniks. At the same time, as original kibbutniks grew older and their children had children, the overall structure of kibbutzim had to adapt to accommodate and ambitions and ideals of multiple generations. With the new phenomenon of kibbutz citizens often being attracted to private life in Israel society, much of the ideological sentiment and solidarity of kibbutz life has dwindled, making the confidence in and sustainability of kibbutzism more difficult, because the people that were living in these compounds were starting to feel deprived, and they wanted to enrich their lives with more freedom and become more capitalistic. I mean, to gather some wealth for themselves. Instead, they kind of, the kibbutz was giving them a leg up, but, were they going to devote, they're going to die there? Some of them didn't want to die in the compound. Some of them wanted to get out and live. First, the historical background. The Jewish people have been at most tolerated in whatever land they have inhabited. More often, unfortunately, Jewish people have been excluded, exiled, or murdered by European Christians or Muslims for their religious beliefs and practices. Most historically significant to the Jews was their exile from Judah to Babylon around 585 BC, and then the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans in 70 CE. Before their expulsion, Jews resided in the Holy Lands of Jerusalem, Tiberias, Jaffa, Haifa, and Tzfat. These lands are the origin of religion itself. and as a result are of indefinable importance to the Jewish community. It is no wonder that upon the realization of necessity for a home of their own, Jewish people returned to this land called Palestine. First, in collective settlements, which were kibbutzim. Centuries of expulsion, pogroms, and widespread social inequality led to the Zionist kibbutz movement, with a mission of reestablishing the Jewish population in their homeland. So these settlements in Palestine with Jews from all over the world. Remember I showed you that kibbutz in 1910. They were Jews from Germany and Jews from Poland. And they placed them in Palestine as refugees to enrich the land and grow the land and the economy. Because most of what they grew was sent over to Rome and other parts of the world. You saw at the end of that movie, or somewhere in that little clip, they told you how much oranges they produced in a year, and how much grain they produced, and how much tomatoes they produced. And this enriched the land for Israel. They used these refugees as labor to bring them wealth. Such an ambitious goal undoubtedly came with tremendous cost to both the Jewish and the native Palestinians, who saw rapid Jewish immigration to lands adjacent to their villages. So as the Palestinians were there, the native Palestinians that were there before all this immigration came in from all over the place, they were seeing all this going on around them. Indigenous Palestinians included mostly Muslims, but also some Christians, as well as those as a variety of sects in the Abrahamic tradition. At the start of the 20th century, these Palestinians began seeing conglomerates of little white tents housing ambitious and singing young Western and Eastern European kibbutzniks. This was the start of modern Zionism, which would evolve dramatically over 20th century along with the kibbutz movement. The movement in tandem, that means alongside of, the movement in tandem with the land of Israel has changed dramatically over a relatively short amount of time that it has existed. As immigration and technological development increased throughout the 20th century, kibbutzniks were faced with a multitude of challenging factors that forced them to adopt in order to survive. Because they had nothing. They had to. Once they got in that camp, their survival was in that camp. It's kind of like back then the women had no rights, and when she got married, she belonged to her husband, and no matter how he treated her, if she had kids, there was no way for her to get out. She had no money, she had no resources, she couldn't get out from under the circumstances that surrounded her. She was trapped there. And of course, she could have walked out, but how to survive? How to survive? Many of these young Jews had no farming experience, but needed to work the land in order to sustain their communities. Later in the century, the kibbutzim that survived the challenges of their formative years were faced with increasing economic pressures following the establishment of the State of Israel. A financial crisis in 1985 resulted in massive debt throughout the kibbutz movement that forced the majority of the kibbutzim to reevaluate their collective characteristics and privatize some of their functions. Along with this dominant force to change among Jewish kibbutzim was the movement's declining political influence in the years following the establishment of the State of Israel. The rise of the Likud political party in 1977 shifted governmental ideological and financial support away from the kibbutz movement. Additionally, internal changes within the kibbutz came about because of external cultural, economic, and natural influences. Nonetheless, the early pioneers of Zionism, the kibbutzniks, faced the need to change with a loyalty to their unique and communal characteristics. The historical significance of the Holy Land. Jerusalem is called the Holy Land today for a multitude of reasons, having been remarkably significant to three of the world's largest religions, Christianity, Islam, and Judaism. It has served as the land upon which significant religious events have taken place as these world religions were formed. To Christianity, Jerusalem was the land on which Jesus concluded his ministry, was crucified, and finally resurrected. For these reasons, the Holy Land was undoubtedly significant for Christians. For Jews and Muslims, there are strong connections to Abrahamic tradition, and thus strong connections to the Holy Land. The Quran similarly considers the Holy Land, which encompasses modern-day Israel, Palestinian territories, Lebanon, and some of Jordan and Syria, to be blessed. To the Jews, the Holy Land is more commonly referred to as the Promised Land, for the reason that it was promised to the Israelites by God. It is such a religiously definitive area that there are even some mitzvot, precepts, and commandments that can only be practiced while on the land of Israel. Jerusalem, while one of the four holy cities in Judaism, is home of the temple, making it considerably more sacred to the religion. The Torah mentions Jerusalem more than 650 times. The Talmud, which serves as the source of halakha, or Jewish law, includes mention of religious duty to settle the land of Israel. So because the Jewish law says that they have to make that land theirs, and they got that through interpretation, okay, by living and dying on such land, Jewish tradition suggests all sins will be absolved upon your burial in Israel. The Holy Land has naturally become the destination of any Jew looking to find geographic fulfillment of their faith.